It runs counter to anything I ever believed is true. Well, welcome. Or what, do you want to tell me that there were rabbis who actually wanted others to learn and share? Well,
yeah, you see, Zohar, though, one thing that bothers me about our conversation, it's very reinforcing and encouraging to discover all this pluralism in the earliest sources of Judaism. And for me, it's, it's fantastic. But at the same time, we know that in order for a people and a tradition to have continuity over time, we cannot ignore the issue of what are the components of continuity, and how do you set borders, because unfortunately setting and defining borders is an inescapable function of any group that wants to survive.
To identify itself. To identify, absolutely.
So that's what takes you, and even if we just said for a quick shorthand that one of the reasons we're living in an age when this pluralism is it's so absent, we'd love to have it, we're like thirsty for it. So maybe that's because of the challenges that modernity placed in front of Judaism and caused this reaction of defensiveness and so on. And maybe that's the difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardim, all that stuff. But it still leaves us, and I've never solved this for myself, it still leaves us, if we want to be serious, with trying to figure out how to get the full equation. In Rav Soloveitchik's terminology, how to get the communal side operating in a way that not only interacts with the individual and subjective side, but even amplifies it and explains to us that it's okay, and yet gives us the tools that we need.
You already answered your question. You already answered your question.
Well, I must have missed it.
Guys, look. The whole idea here is to take individual sanctity as an element that enforces you, that gives you, empowers you to come to the table in order to dialogue and be an active component of the community that decides what kind of life it wants to lead. That's exactly what I'm telling you. The halachic endeavor.
It has been crystallized, and it has been atrophied, and it has been completely suffocated.
But again, that's a generalization.
Which was not supposed to be.
And what is the halachic process? Guys, we read it last, it wasn't even last week, it was 3 days ago, because we have this session today. What did we read? You remember Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel? What were they concerned about? They were concerned about, not about the ruling itself. They couldn't care less about the ruling. You say the Brash Legat, halacha is according to Hillel. But then they ask the question, why according to Hillel? And they say, not because Hillel understood the mind of God. It's because Hillel, now tap into this, my friend.
He listened to the other.
Not just listen to the other, he came into dialogue with them. They reverted their decision.
And he was open to change.
Now, what happened in result of that change? Halakha came forth. Now came the boundary. The boundary is not a limitation necessarily. It depends on how you look at it. The boundary of communal life could be the result of a meaningful dialogue between Jews who now see it as their own responsibility to articulate what kind of a boundary they want around themselves.
That's halakha in action.
Absolutely.
That's what it was meant.
That's why I said, guys, the problem we have is twofold. One, many Jews who do not understand the concept of individual sanctity, and they get lost in the shuffle, in silence. They get lost. They don't join the table for a dialogue. Either they don't have the knowledge, or worse, they don't have the inclination, or worse, they don't see the relevance of it. They don't see Jewish life as a relevant component of meaning-making processes. One. Second, modern Western world understands individualism devoid of any communal commitment. I am not talking about this kind of individualism, my friend. I'm talking about the Jewish version of individualism, which always has to be understood within the context of communal sanctity. Otherwise, it has nothing to do with the Jewish value of individual sanctity. The notion is, I'm saying I'm sacred, but I'm part of something that is bigger than me. And my sanctity can come to full expression only when brushed against other voices. Guys, look, not me, look at Franz Rosenzweig, Martin Buber, people far smarter than myself. Look at what they say. The oneness of the center is not something that we possess clearly and ambiguously, not something we can articulate about. We must search for this, middle of page 4. We must search for this oneness and have faith that we shall find it. Look, he's talking about this unity. Seen from the periphery, however, the center does not invariably the same. In fact, the center of the circle looks different from each point of the periphery. By the way, you know when he said it? 1922, in the opening of the House of Jewish Learning in Hamburg.
Lehrhaus.
Exactly, it's part of the Wissenschaft des Judentums. Look what he says, look what he says. He says from the periphery, this center looks different to each person. One of the exercises I do with students, by the way, when we talk about Mount Sinai, I put the Shema Israel in איך אומרים גליל? A two. I take a cardboard and I turn it into a two. I write the Shema Israel like this. I put them in a circle and I tell them, tell me what you see. Without talking to your neighbor, just write down what you see. What do you get? 50 fragments of the Shema. And then I tell them, I want you now as a group to write down the full Shema. They have to come into dialogue. They have to talk to one another. They can't leave their seat. I tell them, that's Mount Sinai. That's communal revelation. If you don't tell me what you see on your side, I will never be able to decipher the verse in its full, and vice versa. I need you to inform my Jewish identity.
Is that to say, like, a Jew alone can't be a Jew?
For me, a Jew alone, or the last of Jews, if you like that, the last of the week, is a paradox. For me, a Jew alone is a paradox. It's a non-existing entity.
It's a tragedy. There's nobody to argue with.
Oh, Moses heard it with his own voice. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Trust me, a Jew has his mind. He has enough to argue with. Okay, the same thing with Martin Buber, a contemporary, a good friend of our Frank in fact. All men have access to God, but each man has a different access. Mankind's great chance lies precisely in the unlikeness of man, in the unlikeness of their qualities and inclinations. And then one of the greatest scholars of the modern era, Gershom Scholem, who was a very close friend of Martin Buber, look what he says. Tradition is a reflective impulse that intervenes between the absoluteness of the divine word, revelation, whatever that was, and its receiver. The absolutely concrete is at the same time the simply unfulfillable. It is that which in no way can be put into practice. So what can be put into practice? Let's read it again if you didn't. Let's read it again. Page 4, bottom of page 4. Tradition is the reflective impulse that intervenes between the absoluteness of the divine word, revelation, God said something, and its receiver. So what is tradition? In many ways, tradition is our own main access mundi. Because the absolutely concrete, the divine word, this thing that is absolute, is at the same time
What is it referring to?
That's
the divine voice, the divine word.
Tradition.
Tradition is a Masorah, what we do.
That's good.
What we say, what we do, what we agree on.
Got that.
Guys, in other words, tradition.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
The second
Second part
sentence,
is the
I don't
the
quite,
absolute concrete is at the same
I
time.
don't quite follow that
and
second
simply
sentence.
unfulfillable.
The absolute concrete means the divine word, what God actually said. It's unfulfilled. It's not there. It's not in the human realm. It's not what we deal with. We deal with the applicable truth. We deal with that which we can handle in our own limited mind. Tradition becomes a prism to make us a little bit more closer to God, but without letting us lose sight of the fact that we're humans.
The infinity of God's mind and the infinity
And yes, because the infinity of God's mind is a fabulous philosophical idea, but in a religious realm, it's unfulfillable. Now you can understand it within the context that I've given you. It's unfulfillable. There's nothing I can do with the mind of God. Once I ask myself, Tachlis, how am I to translate it? I already submit myself to human limitation. And if
my
I...
problem with
That's
all
the
this
beginning.
pluralism, and go back to the first one that we read, which is goes to the when it comes to deciding how you're going to act. And in Deuteronomy, if a case is too baffling for you to decide, etc., you shall go to the Levites, and whatever they will tell you, you will do.
Yeah, you want me to unpack this for you in a minute, like the rabbis did? What happens if two Levites tell you two contradictory things? What do you do?
So,
Who said?
Eventually, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you choose, because it's anyway it's a small truth. It's a little bit, but there has to be consensus.
There has to be.
A consensus on the action.
There has to be an agreement on a halachic ruling.
Yeah. Sorry,
Okay, not a consensus.
No, you're right. Not a consensus.
Okay, so that's a different thing. And then you do that, right? But then
binding,
again,
and it's binding.
it's binding until
Changes.
it changes.
Yeah, but until it changes, as with a again, it has
With a halachic ruling.
with a halachic ruling.
Absolute.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
there's nothing absolute
No.
about tradition.
No, there's nothing
Okay, the only absolute about tradition is that it's subject to change.
Yeah, but this crisscrosses with, the issues of the two other concepts. Maybe you're gonna deal with it next time, or I don't know.
Today I brought you Achnai's oven, guys. I promised you.
Authority and legitimacy.
Mhm.
Those are the critical, places where we really start to split up into 1,000 little pieces, and where we go at each other's throats, and we forget, the point of the whole exercise, and where we reach our ugliest, are the disputes over authority and legitimacy. And maybe it's because of a massive loss of self-confidence. Maybe we were much better when we could rely on our individual subjectivity and our inner Har Sinai and all that, and maybe in this day and age, because of whatever it is, we're no longer capable of that, so we have to fight each other, and my authority and legitimacy is better than yours.
In so many words, I think that the problem is that Jews today, especially in the Western communities, understand individual sanctity as a value that comes from the modern world, from the modern secular world. It is the product of liberalism, modernism, rationalism, secularism, anthropocentrism,